keep believing in yourself. The only way you're going to get it done is if you believe you'll get there, and allow yourself to vent, expand your team, and meet people. I was looking at my life as never stopping, as continuing, and I think that that's a huge reason that I just kept fighting.
Most pilots don't understand what career opportunities are available in the world of aviation. They're making career decisions based on advice from friends or posts on internet forums, meaning they are taking huge risks with their livelihood without having all the details. This podcast was created to help you understand the aviation industry so you can find your dream job. Let's get ready for Pushback. Here's your host and my dad, Nick Fialka.
Hey, pilot, welcome to Ready for Pushback. It's Nick Fialka. It's another interview episode. Today, I am changing things up a little bit. I'm talking to a lady named Carly Crockett. Carly is a cancer survivor. She's a pilot. She lost her medical for an extended period of time, and she has succeeded in getting her Class 1 back, going to the airlines, being successful. And if you or somebody you know is struggling with medicals, I think that they should listen to this episode. It's a beautiful episode. It's an amazing story. I'm going to go ahead and apologize for myself because I definitely got a little emotional hearing the story and wear my heart on my sleeve, and I don't apologize for any of it, guys. I thought about taking it out and I thought about editing it out, but I want you to know who I am, and the realness of the conversation I think is more important than just editing for television or YouTube or whatever it is. I'm thankful to Carly. I'm thankful to you. I hope you are crushing today, and I hope that you know that you can succeed. It's just breaking down every wall in front of you. That's all you've got to do. So sit back, relax. Let's get ready for Pushback. Hey, pilot, did you just get a new conditional job offer? Are you getting out of the military and going to move your family across the country? Are you going to move in base somewhere, or are you going to go out to find that second home that you've been looking for? Well, I want you to stop right now, pick up the phone, and call Marty and the team at Trident Home Loans. It's an organization that's run by pilots. They understand pilot pay. They understand contracts. They understand military. They have the best VA loans in the United States. Marty and his team have been doing mortgages for years. They've been doing my mortgages for years. I trust him and his team more than any other organization. I challenge you to get a better deal anywhere else. Go ahead, reach out, get a mortgage quote, and then call Marty and his team. They will walk you through the process and show you how competitive their rates are. So go right now, tridenthomeloans.com, and check them out. All right, pilots, here we are with Carly Crockett. Hi, Carly. How are you?
Hi, Nick. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm awesome. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this show. I love your story, and I love your perseverance, and I think you've got a lot to share with the pilot that's listening. So will you please just set the stage? Like, who are you and why are you awesome?
Okay. Well, I met you when you were a 320 FO for the first time, and I got to be your procedure training instructor for a couple lessons I had you for.
Yeah.
So you got to know my story a little bit just because I looked a little bit different. I was very young to be in that training center world. So, and then I had to leave you for a bit to go get scanned. So you and Britt, your sim partner, gave me some nice encouragement that my scans were going to be all clear. But that whole stage began. I'm talking about scans because I'm an airline pilot. I'm an airplane nerd. I'm an Airbus systems super nerd, as you know. But I had a big disruption in my whole journey midway through, actually, kind of right at the beginning of my regional career, when I was diagnosed with osteosarcoma, which is a very, very rare bone cancer. It was found in my right humerus, and it was found in a very interesting way, which I'll get into. But that's a whole big mountain that's blocking your road, and it's a lot to climb. It's a lot to navigate, to know whether I'm going to be alive, to have to figure out a whole new career path, potentially who I am. I mean, my whole identity has centered around flying. I'm born into an airline pilot world. My dad's a pilot for Delta. He's a captain. He's been there for 40 years. All of our friends are general aviation enthusiasts or airline enthusiasts. I didn't know anything else. So to get that taken from me at such a young age was definitely difficult. But as we'll get into, it's the people that I've found throughout this whole career and this alternate plan B making that made this all possible. And now I'm sitting here talking to you because we're doing it at 10:30 because I have a trip to go fly at 2. So that is pretty stinking cool to sit here and be able to tell you that after everything.
I know. Gosh. So how old were you when you got hired by your regional?
I was 26. So I went to college for biology because oddly enough, I had no idea I wanted to be an airline pilot. And I sat there after graduation and I don't know what I want to do with this biology degree. I just know I want to be happy. And I looked at my dad, who's the happiest with his career. He has such a passion and such enthusiasm going to work. I've never seen that in anyone. And I said, I, I'd like that. So I told him I'd like to try flying. And his response was, "Are you serious? I've been trying to get you flying for your entire life. And now you want to do it?" So he said,
Yeah.
"You gotta love it or you're not gonna make it." And I should know what that means. And I loved it. The amount that I loved it, it's the reason why I'm still alive. I'm fully confident when I tell you that statement.
Do you have brothers and sisters, or are you an only child?
I have one sister, Courtney, and she loves flying. She loves the airlines, but she likes to be the passenger. She's a little bit scared of general aviation planes, even when it's my dad and I flying her, because she likes to know everything that's going on. But she is a producer out in California, so she's very much an incredible human being. Loves
Wow.
the airline world, but not a pilot, not a aviation employee.
She should do a movie about you.
She wants to do a bunch of documentaries about so many things involving aviation. She's specifically a documentary producer, so that's right up her alley. I know she's in the middle of quite a few projects at all times, and she's been to probably more countries than any human being I've ever met. Half the
Wow.
time, I have no idea where she is, and she'll just text me a picture of herself in South Korea or in Ghana, and like, when did this happen? So
Wow. Thinking back to being a child growing up, did I think about what my kids might think, because I'm flying and I'm gone for a few days at a time and I'm back. But did you feel like your dad was gone a lot, or did you feel like, hey, this is a pretty good normal thing?
he was such a good dad. He was very involved. So he would go away sometimes for a 14-day trip, but it was part of our childhood. So we knew what was going on and he'd stay in contact and he'd come back. There was never a point where I felt like my dad's not around. There was never a point where I thought anything against his career. It was more motivating. And I think that's what's really cool. You look at a lot of kids who follow their parents' airline careers, and everybody worries about that. Like, how am I going to be a good parent if I'm gone? Then all the kids actually want to do what the parents doing because they're so inspired by the happiness they have.
Yeah, that's so cool. I think about that a lot, and I hope that I'm a good enough dad to be able to be present to all those little kiddos. And that's as I don't know, probably diverting a little bit from our true conversation, but I think it's a beautiful thing. It's so cool.
Yeah. My dad and I talk nearly every day. So he lives in Florida, I live in Atlanta. It's part of the lifestyle.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, tell me about how long were you at the regional before everything kind of got put on hold?
I was there, so I got hired in November of 2017, and then I found out I had cancer on that very special flight, March of 2020. So it was
Oh,
about just over 2 years of flying because training took about 3 months to hit the line. So I was ready to upgrade. It's so funny to think about the aviation world as it is now. I mean, most airlines are forcing FOs to upgrade or really promoting that or hiring direct entry captains. We were waiting in 2020. I mean, I had about 1,400 hours and we were waiting for our class to be a captain. And now to come back and see it completely different, it's really a big example of how quickly things can change.
Yeah, that's wild. So you said a fateful flight where you found out you were sick. Like what? Tell what happened?
So I had been most of my time a New York based pilot, which I adore New York flying. Every time I go out to LaGuardia, I feel like I'm going home. I lived out there, I moved out there. I don't commute, so I move wherever my base is.
Same
But
thing.
yeah. So in January, all my friends were moving from my apartment and I got a position to be a MSPFO. And I don't know why I moved home to Minnesota in January. It was freezing and
Mm,
miserable, but I made that call. My family was there. And I had been a huge gym rat. I loved working out, I loved building strength. So I had some light pain in my arm that was, when I say light, I mean it was barely anything. I figured I pulled a muscle. It was something very small, but it was persisting for a couple months. So we got to March and finally I thought, let me just go get this checked out. If I had tweaked something in my shoulder that I need to do something about, I want to figure it out because this is too long for a pulled muscle to be lightly aching. I had a doctor look at me for 5 minutes and he said, it's a pulled muscle. You can do physical therapy if you want, but just take it easy. So I left very comfortably that appointment. I went on a trip literally the next day. And then on the third day of that trip, it was March 13th of 2020. I was pilot flying. It was the first flight of the day from Baton Rouge to Atlanta. And I remember waking up. It was one of the most beautiful sunrises that I had seen. And my arm felt better. And I just thought, good sunrise, good sign. There was this mystery disease going on in the world that we didn't really know about yet. It was kind of the first day the pandemic took hold.
that's right.
So we come into Atlanta and it's a gorgeous day in Atlanta. It's about 10 knots of wind. And I know I heard the 100-foot call, but I didn't hear the 50. So this all happened really quickly. But in movies, when they show someone having this huge flashback or having this huge decision making moment where they have half an hour to make this split second call, I felt like I had 30 minutes trying to figure this whole thing out. And it happened that quickly between 150 feet. I added a little bit of aileron correction just to compensate for the winds, and I felt a crack. That's all. I heard it or I felt it, and my right arm just fell limp, paralyzed to my side. I
Oh my
can't move
God.
it whatsoever. So I'm looking, and that's where I felt like I had 30 minutes to figure it out. I remember staring at my arm saying, why can't I move it? What's going on? But obviously I'm not going to be able to land this plane. So I told the captain, take the airplane right now. And he did. He took over, but he didn't know exactly why I was asking, but he could hear it in my voice. It was take it now. And so he went around, which was the right call. And then I took over the radios. And I was in shock at the time. So I didn't feel the pain just yet, but I would feel it within a few seconds. But I remember telling Atlanta Tower, said, hey, we're on the go around. And they said, yeah, we see that. Why? And I told them, I think I dislocated my shoulder because that's what I thought. That's all I could think of. Nobody thinks they have a rare cancer when their arm fractures. So they said, okay, do you need medical assistance? I said, can you just loop us back through and land us? We were right there and they brought us first in line. So it was easy. The captain landed. It was an uneventful landing for the passengers. They had no idea. It was just a normal go around, taxied in. We kept the flight deck door closed when we taxied to the gate because by this time I was feeling the worst pain I had ever
Mm,
felt at that point in my life. And I was scared. I was really, really scared. So we get to the gate, and I remember I didn't know who to call. I called crew scheduling and to get pulled off the Montreal turn I'm supposed to do next, but also to say, can someone take me to a hospital? And it took a bit because no one really knew what was going on. Because I didn't know what to tell them. I kept saying my shoulder dislocated, which shouldn't be this much pain. But they sent someone to get me with a wheelchair to grab my things. But I sat at the jet bridge for about 40 minutes waiting, just bawling. I was
mm.
terrified. I was so scared. I remember I called my dad trying to say, "What should I do?" And he's in the Bahamas with his friends. And he's immediately getting on a plane to come up to Minnesota because that's where ultimately I was going to go. That's where I was living at the time. So these two women come to get me with a wheelchair, and they're pushing me in my uniform through Atlanta airport. I'm in full uniform
Mm.
still with all my stuff, and we go to get an Uber. But I crack up because you always you got to smile through everything. And this other pilot from my airline passed me, and he goes, "So this is how you get from gate to gate now?" And I remember I joked and I said, "Yeah, you haven't figured it out yet." And so I get in the Uber and I went to Concentric Clinic, this small clinic in Atlanta, and they x-rayed my arm, and I'm in about half my uniform because they had to put pain medication and shots in my butt. So,
Mm.
I had sweatpants on, but I still had my uniform top on because I couldn't take it off because my arm hurt so bad. And the doctor comes in and he said, "So I want to look at this x-ray with you." My humerus was entirely gray. He said, "You have a fracture, but the bigger picture is your humerus has completely eroded. You have an underlying condition. I think you might have cancer." And
Oh my God.
I can't tell you what that feels like. I was sitting there thinking I'm supposed to be in Montreal, and now somebody's telling me I have cancer.
Mm.
What my mind was just running wild. So they sent me on another Uber to go to Wellstar, which was a bigger hospital, because they said we want you to be looked at by somebody else. Ultimately, they did the same thing, except they gave me some better pain meds, success.
Yeah.
But they found the same thing, and they said we think that you might have an underlying condition. You need to go to get this MRI scan done to figure out what's going on. And it was weird because everybody in the waiting rooms, they were coming in for COVID and they were coughing. And I just remember being terrified I was going to catch this mystery plague because that's the hot topic right now. I didn't know I had something so bad and that would consume the rest of my life, change my life forever at that moment. So I Ubered back to the airport, and my mom had flown down on my passes. She got down and she met me. I went through security, and I remember I just looked like a mess. And they're like, "Yeah, come on through. We'll help you." And met my mom, and she helped me get back to Minneapolis. I went and got an MRI the next day, and the doctor came in and she said, "It's osteosarcoma. You have osteosarcoma." So that was my March 13th day, which I think about all the time. They said most people find out that they have bone cancer if they have a pathologic fracture. That's what that's called. If the bone just wears till it breaks, that's how they find out because there's no good symptoms that you have that stand out. I was tired. I was a regional pilot. Of course, I'm tired.
Yeah.
So I'm thankful. I think it gave me something to fight for to have it happen 80 feet above the busiest airport in the world. It gave me so much drive, so much fight. And also I don't think I would have found out otherwise. There's doctor's appointments that were canceled if they were just not for a big emergency reason. The pandemic took hold pretty much that day. I don't think I would have found out I was sick in time had it
Mm.
not fractured that day. So that's my day I was talking.
Did they put a cast on your arm?
I got a sling. It was a
Okay.
sling because basically the whole treatment plan it varies. Sometimes they do the surgery first, sometimes later. But when the bone fractured, the tumor is actually liquid. I did not know this until I had it happen. So the liquid tumor leaked into my deltoid muscle, which contaminated the entire muscle, which is why my arm went paralyzed. So they
Oh
put
my
it in a
God.
sling and they said it's stable for now. I actually went through all my chemotherapy in the sling, um, and which is why I needed elbow surgery later on because my arm was completely bent and frozen. But I went through all of chemo in that sling, which was another terrifying aspect because then every move I made, I thought I was causing the tumor to leak more and paralyze more muscle. So that was also fun and enjoyable. But it was better to get the chemo done if I was stable than to get the surgery, have to wait to do the chemo because the chemo was very, very aggressive. So that was able to take priority for me, which also ultimately good.
Was the was the cancer pretty far advanced as far as that goes?
So osteosarcoma, the diagnosis and the um, recovery odds, it's based off of where if the cancer's isolated or if it's spread when you get that original diagnosis. So I was very fortunate it was isolated in my arm. It did later spread to my lungs, but because at first diagnosis it was just isolated to my arm, I held on to those pretty good statistics for a while. Once you start to have two recurrences, which is what I ended up having, they've dropped a bit. But um, luckily, at the start, that first round of chemo was a lot more impactful. Osteosarcoma, it loves the lungs, so that's typically where it goes, no matter where it starts, whether it's in your femur, your humerus. Some people have gotten it in their hips, in their jaw. But the common places are the leg and the arm, like I've had it. So if it's there, like it was, I was good from the start. If it's spread, you're at about, I want to say it's 20 to 30% versus if it's isolated, 70% chance of beating it. So.
Timothy P. Pope is a certified financial planner dedicated to guiding professional pilots through smart financial planning. Whether it's saving for retirement, investment management, a seamless military transition, or strategic tax planning, Tim is your trusted financial partner. Also, you can join Tim as he leads engaging discussions on personal finance and strategies for professional pilots on the brand new Pilot Money podcast. Timothy P. Pope, helping professional pilots make the most out of life. So you have this diagnosis, you have this mess that you're now in, and you've got this job too. So I'm sure that was like you thought you're never going to fly again, right?
Oh, on the contrary, I was blissfully unaware of how sick I was. So I told everyone I'll be flying in 6 months. And I I even look now because down the line, we could talk about it, but I wanted to find purpose. So after the surgery, I applied to get my graduate degree, my master's of science from UND, and I'm now applying to get my MBA. But I'm reading my old letter, and in the letter, I'm like, I'll be flying within the next year. It just kept going. I was like, yeah, 6 months, 6 months, 6 months.
Mm.
It got to be to the point where my doctors actually would get a little bit confused with me because they'd say, Carly, like, you need to focus on your life. Think about your life here. Because I was incredibly sick. We got to the point where I was in the hospital once because they said if I had any more chemo, I would die.
Mm.
And it was that bad. But I always just said, no, 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 I'm fine. I'm going to be flying. I never once gave up on that. And I look back now and all these doctors that told me to focus on my life, I was looking at my life as never stopping, as continuing. I was saying, what am I going to do when all this is over? And I think that that's a huge reason that I just kept fighting because I never once sat down and I look back now and I say, holy crap, I was really sick now.
Mm.
But I never let myself focus on that the entire fight. When I was bald, when I was in a body brace, when I was scraggly and I couldn't do anything for myself, my mom had to shower with me and I still said, oh, yeah, 6 months, we'll fly.
Mm. Lord have mercy. Um, when it went down, was it did when you look at what happened with the company, did you just call them and say, "Hey, this is what I've got, and I'll call you back," or what was that process like?
Yeah, they knew at first because I had talked to the chief pilot to help me get on a flight back to Minneapolis, and I had to call them because I had an arm break mid-flight. You gotta call the chief pilot on that one. But
Yeah.
they put me on sick leave at first. You burn through all your sick time, and then you go to short-term disability, and then it just rolls into long-term disability. And it was different. I know that staying out as long as I did is probably rare. There's a lot of people that do it, and I know they know the stories, but I went through a point where they said you have to go to court to argue for now your social security. And I have so many other things I'm focused on. I don't care about getting social security. I just need to focus on getting back to work and moreover beating the cancer. But you have to do it. So I it was a lot to keep up with. That was a lot in my back pocket. It was all through Unum, through my company at the time. So we kept making sure that that was still tracking correctly. We kept making sure that I then had to talk to a lawyer, that I had to explain my case, that I did end up winning, so then I had to pay back everything that I had won from Social Security, pay that back to the company. It's a very confusing process how it all works, but um, they definitely call you and tell you along the way. But
You were in many you had m and your family lived up there, so that was very fortunate.
yeah, both my parents lived up there. They're split, but they live about 5 minutes from each other. So it was the perfect time. I would say the best time to get cancer is when the entire planet is going through a global pandemic, because
Mm,
for me, it felt like the whole world stopped with me.
mm.
Everybody was on pause. Nobody was flying. And I got my own cancer pod and my own private hospital room because I was so immunocompromised. So if
Wow.
you're going to get cancer, you should do it during a global pandemic. But
Alright, everybody.
and here my
Remember
email
that.
keeps going off. But um, for me, we lived in a pod together. So I went and I moved in with my mother. I lived in her living room basically because it was hard to move around.
Mhm.
My dad, who was flying, Delta was amazing for him. They gave him a leave so he could take care of me. So he didn't have to be bringing any sort of diseases in to me, which was incredible. So he got a very extended leave to take care of me, which was great. So he
Wow.
would come over, and my mom's husband now was great. It was like a blended family, and we would watch movies, we'd play Monopoly, just to be together, but it was an isolated pod.
Gosh, wild. How long how long were you in treatment before things kinda started moving in the right direction?
A while. I did 5 months of chemo. So what that looked like, it started because the treatment that I had and how sick I was, they didn't want me in the hospital, which I think ended up in my favor. Usually, osteosarcoma is treated with three drugs. It's doxorubicin, cisplatin, and methotrexate. And
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
methotrexate is a lethal dose, though, so they have to have you do a hospital stay while you get that done, and they didn't want me in the hospital for that, so they chose to leave that drug out, which worked out great because I didn't need it, but that could have been a huge other contributing factor had it not been in the middle of a pandemic, and had I not had an oncologist that was willing to leave that one out and monitor me to that extent. I went to the University of Minnesota Hospital for all my chemo and then on to Mayo Clinic for the continuous and foreseeable future. But um, we started with I'd go in for one day every 3 weeks, I believe it was, 2 days. So the first day they'd hook me up to the IVs and I'd sit in my little pod and they'd give me a hip pack with the doxorubicin to take home. I had a port put in my chest that I still have scars from and scars on my neck from where the IVs were in. And for 2 days, I'd get cisplatin, and then I'd come home and have this home hip pack that would continue to pump the doxorubicin through me for 96 hours. And I can't explain how great it was at the end of that 96 hours when my little hip pack would say doxorubicin complete, or treatment complete for that session, and I got to be free of doxorubicin for about 3 weeks, and then they would hook it back up again and do it all over. But it started with my hair starting to fall out, and I'd run my fingers through my hair, and it would just start to come out in chunks. So eventually, we just shaved the whole head. I looked decent. Um, one walker told me I was really good looking, so I feel like I really rocked the bald look at that point.
You
But
did.
then we went through 4 rounds of the dual meds. After the fourth round, I had a sore throat. That's when I went into the hospital, and that's when they told me that this if I had another round of cisplatin, that would be it. I wouldn't have survived that, which
Mm.
is I'm sitting in my hospital bed trying to watch Grey's Anatomy, and they tell me this stuff. I was like, "This is really
Grey's
unpleasant news."
How can you be getting chemo and be watching Grey's Anatomy at the
How
same
can you
time? Like,
not? What else am I gonna watch? I'm in the hospital. It's like live action.
live actions. Oh my
But
gosh.
so then I
And
had 2 more rounds, of that, and then the big surgery.
Did you feel awful the whole time?
I would feel very bad during the hip pack, those 96 hours. The first day wasn't horrible. The second day got very bad. And then those 96 hours, I felt horrible. And about the week after, I didn't feel great. And then I would get better the next week. So my big thing that I did during chemo, I felt like I always had to do something. I couldn't control the cancer, but I wanted to do something. What I could do was walk. My legs were still functioning. So I walked every day. And I remember on those chemo days, sometimes I'd make it to the stop sign or the kitchen table, but I would walk.
Mm.
And some days then by those 2 weeks that I had off in between, that last day before I went on the other cycle, I'd be able to make it 6 miles. And I'm this little bald girl in a sling walking with one of my parents, or my friends would come walk with me outside because that was okay with the pandemic if we walked outside with masks on and everything. But I remember feeling so proud of that. Sometimes I'd even go by myself and I would make it 6 miles, and then we'd be back to the block and work up to it every time. But that's still
And you
huge for me. I still walk every single day. It it's refreshing. I play music, whatever's fitting my mood, and I daydream the whole time. Every day I dreamt about getting back to flying. It motivated me.
and you're such a slight person. Like, you are just there, like, you are a small human being, and I mean, Lord have mercy. I can't imagine there's there's not a lot of room for the medicine to move around in you, and
Yeah,
it's just, gosh, man, it's gotta be awful.
yeah,
Ugh.
that was definitely different. I think the smallest I got, it was for me, I was about like 104, but
Oh my
you look at
god.
pictures and it just looks skeletal. It's
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, that's like the weight of your skeleton.
Mhm.
It's, oh my gosh. Carly, um, so you went through all of this mess, and then you had to have a surgery.
Yes.
What why a surgery, and what went down?
So the surgery, they have to remove the contaminated bone, and for me, they had to remove the contaminated muscle as well. So what was pretty cool, that's where I switched hospitals. And this is what I recommend to anybody going through any sort of medical hurdle. Get second opinions. Expand your team. We say that in aviation all the time, but you need as many people on your side as you can. I was at a great hospital. I mean, the University of Minnesota Hospital is very well known. The chemotherapy I got, my oncologist was excellent. But my orthopedic surgeon there, he said the best he could give me was use of my hand only. We had amputation on the table, but finally he said, if I remove this entire deltoid muscle, which has to come out, and most of your humerus, the best you got is use your hand. So for me, that would just be a dead weight, this right arm just hanging there, and I I wanted more. That's not gonna work to fly planes. So I got a appointment at Mayo Clinic, and Mayo Clinic was the best thing that's ever happened to me. My orthopedic surgeon that took on my case, I he's like my life leader now. I go to him for everything. I have asked him so many questions about so many random things. He's had to tell me, "Oh, maybe your hips are hurting because you're over 30."
Yeah.
Just like basic answers. But he took on my case, and he's the most incredible human being I've ever met. And at Mayo Clinic, he knew of a surgeon also, so they do everything at Mayo Clinic as a team. It's very CRM driven there, which is so cool. They will
Mhm.
never take on anything and say they did it by themselves. Every time I'd say thank you, he would say, "No, it was my team. It was our team." So they had this surgeon that invented this procedure where they take your pec muscle out of your chest and do a muscle transfer and shove that into your arm. So they tag teamed it, and they did this 11-hour procedure. The original orthopedic surgeon, he took out my humerus, and then he had replaced it with an allograft and part of a cadaver bone that blended together. And
Yeah.
then they put if you look at the x-ray, it's like this metal prong. So then the shoulder surgeon comes in and he does this reverse shoulder rotation, takes out my deltoid, puts in my chest muscle and a few muscles from my back. And I remember them telling me what this would get me. And they said about at max 90 degrees, I can get just shy, maybe 70, but obviously it's enough to fly. And
Wow.
I remember looking at my 2 options. I can do that, or I can do this hand thing, or I can amputate. And I remember my first orthopedic surgeon at the U of M told me, he goes, "This other surgery that this guy invented, it's too risky. There's too much risk with it." And I thought, "What are you talking about?
Mm.
The risk? It's worth everything. This is a life versus I have 2 lives that you're presenting me with. I get one where I can be nearly fully functional to the point where people can't tell that I'm lightly crippled, or I have one where I'm going to need help doing so many things. I have a dead weight attached to my body and I can grip things, but that's about it." So I did this surgery, and these 2 doctors, Mayo Clinic and my oncologist at the University of Minnesota, I mean, they're just all my superheroes. They gave me a life that I could that never said that I would not fly. I mean, my orthopedic surgeon from Mayo Clinic, he would say, "You're not my first pilot. I've seen this kind of attitude before." And I've given him all the trading cards because he wants them so badly. But I got put in a full-on body cast because when you have a muscle transfer, your arm has to stay locked in this certain position. So it was 8 weeks, and it wrapped around my torso and then stretched down my arm. And so I could walk, but I had to walk with a cane, and it was very wobbly. And then I had to sleep reclined. So we got a hospital bed in my mom's living room
Oh
that I
my
slept
God.
in for 8 weeks. And so that's what is pretty cool. I sometimes, get out of the shower and I look at the scars that I have.
Yeah.
A lot that you can't see, a big one that you can. But this one left a giant scar from about midway through my chest, all the way down most of my arm, just to about my elbow. And that's very big. It's very
Yeah.
obvious. My shoulder looks like a little stub because it's different. But then I look at my neck and I see where the port was hooked up, and I see the flower from where the big plug was in for the chemo, and I look at my back and I see the dark circles down my spine where the brace would pinch me. And then I
Mm.
look at my side and I see these tiger stripes that are very, very small, that they're from the lung surgeries from each of my recurrences that I had, where they just nip those in the butt by taking the tumors out with this really cool contraption that cuts and staples at the same time, and chest tubes and all that fun stuff.
Oh
And
my
I
God.
feel my elbow that's bony from the elbow surgery where they had to remanipulate that because it was so stiff from being in a sling for months. And
God.
I'm so proud of
Yeah.
those. I can't tell you how proud I was to walk through an airport with 4 stripes on my shoulder with those scars. It's and only I can really know what came with them because there's only one that's pretty identifiable, but it's
Carly.
a lot of pride
Jeez. Yeah.
and a lot of big superheroes on my team.
Yeah, for sure. What so I mean, the recovery took you a long time. And what, like, at some point, you decided just to, like, go get a job, and you got a job in not in Minnesota. So,
Yeah.
what was that decision process like?
So, yeah, it was a while. When I came out of the body brace, or when I was still in the body brace, I had no use of my arm. I had my hand that was just starting to become functional again. So I do remember my first movement. I have it on video. The Vikings were playing the Saints, and if you're a Vikings fan, we kind of hold a grudge because the Saints were mean to Brett Favre that one time. So I put the middle finger up to the TV because we were getting
Oh,
whooped like we
jeez.
always are. But that was my first movement. I could move my finger. And
Wow.
so I had years of physical therapy. I went down, my dad had a place in Florida that he moved to, so I went and I lived with him. The warm weather was better for recovery than being in Minnesota. And
So
then,
you got to the point where you're like, "Hey, the cancer stuff, like, we beat it, and now we've gotta get me
yes.
back to operational status."
Exactly. After that surgery, I got a call from my orthopedic surgeon at Mayo Clinic, and he said it is 100% cancer free at this time. So I got scanned every 3 months because the odds of it coming back were high. But in that time, I went down to Florida. I did physical therapy, a lot of pool therapy because that can help you move much more freely without all the weight that's on it. And I started to feel normal. I remember I was going to get a place in West Palm Beach because I love Florida so much. And then in March, they found a recurrence in my left lung. So we went and I moved back to Minnesota, got that taken care of. It's about a 2 week recovery from that kind of surgery. It's aggressive. Those 2 weeks were hell, but it's doable. You get back on your feet, and it's a tiny little chunk of your lung. So I still walk 8 miles a day. I don't face issues from that. Then in September, I had one in my right lung, so we did the whole thing again. And now I'm kind of annoyed because this is really hard for me to start applying for jobs if I keep having recurrences. So I'd like this whole thing to be over. And the biggest compliment I've ever gotten this second surgery, I remember trying to decide. They said, do ablation or you do surgery and you cut that tumor out or that nodule out, and I couldn't decide. I don't know what's best. And my oncologist wasn't calling me back, and I was like, "What's going on? What do I pick?" So I met with my orthopedic surgeon, the lung surgeon who already did my first one, and they said just do the surgery. I said that's a great idea. Let's do it. And finally, my oncologist called me back, and he said, "Look, here's the problem. I want to put you back on chemo so badly because you've had two recurrences in a very, very short time. That is not good. But most people in your situation are doing bucket list items and you are applying to grad school, you're going to grad school and you're looking for jobs." He goes, "I can't do this to you. I can't put you back on chemo. So I'm going to give you a year. If you ever have another recurrence in this next year, I will do surgery. But one more recurrence, I'm putting you back on chemo." And I said, "Okay." No more recurrences apparently. So 2 weeks after that last surgery, which happened September 15th of 2021, I interviewed at Delta Professional Services to be a simulator instructor 2 weeks after that surgery. And that was the day that my life turned around. I have not had a recurrence since. And I think 100%, a million percent, that it's because I had a purpose given to me again. And I was surrounded by a family of people supporting me, giving me every opportunity in the book to find a plan B, but also saying, "How can we get your medical back?" And I felt like I belonged. I was a crew member again. I mean, as a simulator instructor, I was a procedures trainer instructor. So I only worked in the procedure trainers and the ground school courses. But you're a part of that crew. And I felt whole again. Everything who I was flying. Socially, it was general aviation. Professionally, it was airlines. And I was a workout rat. I lost all those things that I defined myself by in one sweep. So to get that back, I mean, I had airlines, I had talking about little airplanes again. It saved my life. Everything. I have not had a recurrence since.
Man, praise God, that's amazing.
And I worked there
It's
for 2 years.
yeah.
And I moved
I
to
mean,
Atlanta for it.
yeah, you moved to Atlanta. Yeah. Hey, pilot, does your pilot uniform make a short flight feel like a transcon slog? Flight Uniforms have reinvented aviation shirts with 3D stretch, stain repellents, and no wrinkles. These shirts are just plain comfortable and ready for takeoff right out of your rollerboard. Flight Uniform is trusted by more than 25,000 pilots, and their flagship flight shirt has over 1,500 five-star reviews. I've worn every pilot shirt out there, and if you know me, you know I only wear Flight Uniforms. Be the envy of every cockpit at flightuniform.com and get a special podcast exclusive discount with the code SpitfirePod20 to take 20% off your first order at flightuniform.com. Were you open with the people that hired you, the DPS guys, about, hey, look, I don't have my medical right now, but I'm trying to get my medical?
They called me actually. My dad was trying to get my story out there. Originally, of course, I'm trying to get any job, so I called the regional that I worked with and I said, "Do you guys have anything available?" But it was 2021. It was still
Yeah.
post COVID. There was nothing. And so we were looking in every avenue. I had no idea what on earth I could do, what I was qualified for, but my dad wrote out my story and he started handing it to people he was flying trips with because he went back and he was flying at that point in time. And eventually it ended up in the email box of the president of DPS and then of the 320 training department. It That's how I got my job because together they said, worst case, this is an hour where we interview her and she doesn't get it, or this could be a really cool thing that we do. And I mean, the people, the management between Delta Professional Services and Delta, whose Delta Professional Services is wholly owned by Delta, they've become not just people that I worked with; they're my family. They supported me through everything. They knew everything about my case when they brought me on, when they interviewed me.
Mm.
Knew I was trying to fly, but for 2 years, that they let me figure myself out and let me grow and gave me every opportunity I can think of. It was the perfect place to learn and to spontaneously come up with a lot of cool ways to get the medical back. I wouldn't have the medical back without these people.
Mm. Why is that?
They came up with all the ideas. There's no FAA guidance for osteosarcoma. There's no guidance for bone cancer. The FAA actually at the time was looking at it like lung cancer because it had popped up in both my lungs. And
Sure.
it is not lung cancer, it's bone cancer in your lungs. Lung cancer,
Mm.
it much more easily can spread to your brain. So there is a 3-year window that the FAA makes you wait to be clear because of how easily that can get into your brain. Bone cancer is a very slim chance that it's going to go there, very slim. So to convince people of that, for one person, I looked for stories endlessly. I think I found one gentleman in South Africa who had gotten a third class medical after osteosarcoma, but I've yet to find anybody else that's gotten a first class after osteosarcoma. I'm still searching, but that was a lot to convince people. So thanks to everyone I worked with. You've got people in a position where I'm one mind. I have only so many ideas. They know so many more people. This is where the team expansion saved my butt and gave me family and lifelong friends that I'm going to have because they said, "What if we try this? What if we try getting you a 320 type rating so we can prove to the FAA that your arm works?" Which is something that I had to pay for myself because I didn't need it for the job I was performing. But for me, that is worth every cent. If that's what it takes to prove to the FAA, to get an FAA certified examiner to say she flew the 320, I'll pay for that. That
Wow.
ended up being what worked. But
I'll also
ultimately,
say that I'll also say that anybody that can move their hand an inch can fly the 320.
well, what's funny is when I was just getting physical therapy, they put me up in this roller cart just to try to start to get movement going back and forth. And of course, I sent it to my 320 friends and I said, "Is this enough to fly the 320?" And they said, "Yeah, that's totally enough."
Yeah. So did you have like, was there some guy in a room and you had to go, like, high five him? Like, what do you have to do? Like, if somebody's in this scenario, what do you tell them? What do you like, how do you yes, be persistent, but, like, tell me what you did.
Just be persistent and never give up on yourself and get other people in your corner. When I got hired, and also live in a little bit of blissful ignorance because that does help. The interview day, I remember I got taken down to the procedure trainers, and the 320 gentleman who's become one of my best friends, he said, "Can you move the thrust levers, Carly?" And I said, "Oh yeah, I can totally move the thrust levers." I sat my left arm on, or my right arm, I'm sorry, on the thrust levers. I couldn't move them a centimeter, and I said, "I can do it." And he goes, Okay." I said, I can do it," and I kept saying it'll work, and it clearly wasn't. And he said, "We have a place for you anyways." So as I built strength throughout those 2 years. I mean, it was a continuous build. I'm still building strength. You just keep knocking down doors. And I first started to go after the medical officially, without like starting to talk to the FAA about it in December of 2022. And that's when they started to say, no, it's lung cancer. It's lung cancer. And I tried to explain, no, it's not. So that's when we, tried to get more ideas going. I'm a huge general aviation fan, which means I'm a huge fan of air shows. So I go to Oshkosh and Sun and Fun all the time. I was at Sun and Fun and we're standing outside the FAA booth. And I thought, "Well, maybe someone in there would be able to help me." I walked in and they had a line for people to talk about their medicals. And I walked up to this one gentleman and I remember the look on his face. And he's told me, he goes, "Other people heard what you were saying and they were so happy that you did not come up to their booth and you came up to mine."
Oh my
And I just
God.
dumped everything on him. But it was the luckiest person to walk up to because instead of just saying no, he said, "We're gonna have to get some tests. We're gonna have to do a lot," which meant I'm getting more scans done, which I'm already doing every 3 months. But now I'm getting a brain scan. I was hit by a boat when I was 12 years old by a drunk boater. So I had some frontal lobe damage, which popped up on my brain scan with something called a cavernoma, which turns out it was completely fine. But I will admit, when radiologists give you your report, they like to give every possibility. So written down there was, "You might have leptomeningeal cancer, which will kill you in 6 months." I was, oh my god! So I went through a panic attack. Found out through a neurologist meeting and more MRIs of my brain that it was absolutely fine, no big deal, and the FAA was able to approve it. Going to a hospital as credible as Mayo Clinic and meeting this gentleman at Sun and Fun who was a medical officer and took my case on, those were two of the most important things I did. The FAA trusts Mayo immensely, as they should. So to have every report that I had coming into the FAA signed off from Mayo, that was big. And I did everything they asked, even getting scans. I remember the neurologist goes, "I'm specifically writing on here only was scanned because the FAA wanted to, had no reason to get scanned." I don't care. I'm going to do it. And I'll go through every hoop you ask of me because that's the easiest way to get things done. This gentleman that I met at Sun and Fun took on my case and he said that they would all sit and meet about my case and he would guide them through based on all the information that I sent him. So the more I gave him, the easier it was for him to do it. And what was really cool was when it finally ended up going through, they said, "Okay, you're approved for a soda ride. Now that you've gotten," that's when I went after speaking to him. About 2 weeks later, I had gone down to Florida to a Part 141 school where I paid to get my 320 type rating because you can get typed in a simulator if you don't have a medical. You can do that. You just got to pay for it. So I got that done. Um, which was pretty funny because their FAA person recommended I use a stick at first to poke the overhead panel. She was being really funny, and I said, "Are you serious?" She goes, "No, you're fine. Go take it." But um, then once that's done and everything's approved, they said, "Do the soda," which is a statement of demonstrated ability. And they were able to do that in a Delta simulator where I was working because I worked there for Delta Professional Services. And we went and I showed that it was fully functional in a 320, which it was. I had no problems flying. I flew it right seat to show because that's easier. At the time, yes, I could move the thrust levers by that moment. So we had gotten to that point. But once that was established, he said, "You passed it." And I remember we walked back up to the office at Delta Professional Services, and everybody was up there to surprise me. And everybody.
And did you give your 2-week notice immediately? Like, at
No,
the party, you're like, "All right, guys, see you later."
no, it was really hard for me to walk away from DPS. That was hard because of how much I loved working there. The people I got to work with, I got to work with so many people who had been through cancer that had similar stories to my own, but didn't get a medical back, or
Wow.
chose a different path, or said they wanted to be a sim instructor because they liked doing that. And you feel at home. And when you're going through treatment, you feel so isolated. Like, who else could possibly be going through this? Here's a whole team of people that have gone through it in different formats. I stayed on. That day, I went out to my car and I sat in my car and I literally sat there for an hour. I was going to my friend's winging ceremony because he had just gotten through indoc with Delta, and I was going to pick him up. And I just sat in my car for an hour and I cried in my hands. And I couldn't believe what had happened. Something I had said 6 months, 6 months, 6 months, it had taken about 4 years. So eventually I contacted my regional and contacted Endeavor, and I said, I'm ready to come back, but I want to fulfill my commitments to DPS because they had done so much for me. So I stayed on. I worked for DPS through till December. Endeavor gave me a December class, and I worked up till December 3rd, and that's we everybody got to say goodbye, and they gave me this amazing president's award for working with
Mm.
them, which was just an honor. It was a surprise party. The president goes, can you come in and fill out paperwork? And I was like, yeah, sure, I'll come fill out paperwork. And I walk in and it's a surprise party, and it was, I will never in my life forget what that company did for me. But I'm going to be back there. I want to go back to the training department. It's all I want to fly, but I want to be back in that mix. I can't wait till I get to go back and be a part of that world again. And then I started at DPS in December. I had to go back. I'm sorry, not DPS, Endeavor in December. So that's when the transition went forward.
Wild.
Yeah,
What was it like getting back? I'm sure you crushed the Sims. I mean, that was
I
probably pretty
did.
easy.
But honestly, it was different because I had been off for 4 years. I did get a few looks like, "Why are you coming back as a first-time captain?" I lost my medical as a first officer, and I went back. I said, "I want to be a captain. I've earned this spot."
Oh my gosh.
And I hadn't flown in 4 years, so a lot of people say, Do you want to be a first officer first?" I said, "No," and
Wow.
um, it was. I was nervous. I'll admit it. I knew my arm worked in an Airbus. My arm is it's very positional. So I was worried because I hadn't tried it. Nobody just has a CRJ in their backyard that they can go
Yeah.
try and see if it works. But I was sitting left seat, so I just had to work the thrust levers, which we had figured out. I could do that in a bus, no problem at that point. I had to go through the full course at Endeavor because I had been out for so long. So I got to start with a bunch of new hires, which we're all super good friends now.
Oh
And
man.
it's so cool because their first time, they're, in their early 20s coming in for the first time, except for 3 of us that were over 30 that started our over 30 group in the back corner. But, um, training everything that I learned teaching 320, I was teaching the captains I dream about being one day. I was teaching
Yeah.
you, and
Yeah.
you're now a 7.5 captain. I got to learn more doing that than I ever could have dreamed of. So I took all that and all the jump seats that I had gone on with my boss because he said, "Come learn. You can fly with me every time I fly." I listened to his briefings. His abnormals briefings. I pretty much mimic those at this point, and everything that I taught, I got to emulate because I got to see what I wanted to be like. And I'll admit, training was a breeze. And I got to do my first flight with a LCP who was in my original new hire class at Endeavor,
No kidding.
and that was all random. So,
Wow.
um, that first day flying back to do it with a friend was pretty much the coolest possible thing.
Yeah. Wow. So that took 4.5 years?
4.5 years. I flew my first flight. It was end of February. I did my check ride February 13th, and then I flew about a week later, and it was a flight out of Detroit to Rochester. And I took a deadhead up to Detroit, where the deadhead was flown by a girl that was in my new hire class at Endeavor, who now works for Delta. Then I get to go meet my LCP, who's my friend from my first original class. And I can tell you it was overcast, gray skies in Detroit. So, to anybody else, the best advice I can give is don't compare yourself. I spent so many years before I got sick thinking, am I getting into this later than my friends? I'm comparing myself to every human being around me. Why on earth do I want to do that? Because the view that I get at the end of it, it's not theirs. It's
Yeah.
anybody else might go sit at a Detroit takeoff right on the runway and it's overcast skies and they say, ah, okay, here we go. It's Detroit. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen in my whole life. To hear clear for takeoff and I got to fly the first leg. He goes, "You can fly it. You know how to do this." And it to hear clear for takeoff and to pull back on that yoke and lift off. I just remember sitting there and my eyes just had stars in them. I thought it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. So we flew Rochester to Detroit and back, and then we went up to Montreal, which was pretty cool because Montreal was the layover I was supposed to have March 13th of 2020 when my arm fractured. So it was a pretty special day.
Um, so I mean, 4 years, man, you must be pretty close to flowing, huh?
Yeah, I
When
might be
you had
sending in my information already. So
Oh, really?
I'm hopeful to wear Delta wings is the dream. I grew up a Delta kid, obviously, but I've never had a company and its subsidiaries. They saved my life. It's to wear those wings will be the best day that I have ever experienced. The day I did get to pin those on my chest, and so
God,
I'm hopeful to come over in the fall. I will be bidding 320 every single base there is, but I'll gladly fly anything.
I was totally gonna ask if you're gonna stick on the 320.
I'm gonna try like hell, but
And then you're gonna have some DPS instructor that's new, and you're gonna be, like, correcting him and
well, I'm
or
gonna
her.
try to fly with get trained by all my friends, and it's just been going great. I've they say that first month as a captain, so much stuff happens to you, and it totally has. I've done an air return into LaGuardia for going single gen. I've had a bunch of Cat 2 situations, maintenance issues, plane swaps, and it's just going so easy because it's exactly like they say. You just expand your team and follow the procedures that you learned in the Sims, and it all works itself out. The people that I'm getting to fly with are so inspiring. I mean, I've flown with 23-year-olds that just said, "Hey, I want to be a pilot," and they're 23 and sitting right seat at an airline. I mean, I don't know what I was doing at 23, but I certainly wasn't anywhere near that level. And
Yeah.
it's just it's really been amazing. I've already met a lot of great people and friends that I'm going to stay in contact with, but I cannot wait to come set foot on Delta property again.
So, what advice would you give to somebody that feels like they're in over their head in a medical situation right now that is just, like, they feel like they're never gonna be back?
I'll admit there were days that I felt that, but I could count them on one hand. Uh, allow yourself to feel that. I would the few days I remember them very clearly because they were so few, and they would shock my mom so much because what I'd do is I'd get grumpy and I'm in my little beanie that I wore when I was bald because that's what I wore all the time. It was summer, so I didn't have to wear much. And I'd turn on Planet Earth and I'd listen to the British accent of the narrator there talk about animals, and I'd sit there and I'd stare at it in this grumpy face, and she'd be like, "Carly, what's wrong?" I said, "Just let me be grumpy today. I'll be happy tomorrow." And she goes, "Okay." So let yourself feel it, but don't dwell in it at all. There's nothing good that's going to come out of it. The only way you're going to get out of it is by doing something. So even if it means you were able to walk to a table or a stop sign, do something. And then just keep knocking down doors. I was told no. I was told no by a few people, but most people told me yes. Even you told me, yeah, sure, because of the attitude that I had, because you probably didn't want to break my little heart and say, "Ooh, I don't think you'll fly again." Keep believing in yourself. So I call it blissful ignorance because that's what it was for me. But the only way you're going to get it done is if you believe you'll get there and allow yourself to vent, expand your team, and meet people, meet friends that you feel comfortable talking to. Mine are these people that I've gotten to work with, but just don't get don't get hung up on it. I think the hardest thing for me with cancer is when somebody says, are you better now? And I say yes, because I don't know how to explain. I could, everything could fall apart with any scan I get. And because I felt that before. So, what I've done every 3 months, I get scanned, and I just try to do as much as I can in those 3 months, because if it gets dark on that scan day, I never want to look back and say I didn't do enough. So that's the best advice I can have. Just do something.
Carly Crockett, you're an amazing human, and I'm proud of you. I'm excited for you. I appreciate you taking your time and just pouring into the pilot that's listening to this. I know there are a lot of people that are going to be helped from this conversation. So thank you for spending my time. I'm excited for you. I hope you get the 757, by the way. I hope you don't get the 320.
Yeah, because we would have a blast flying together.
Let's go. Let's go. All right, Carly, you're amazing. Thank you for spending your time with me. Thank you for being so vulnerable. You're amazing.
Anything I can do, I'm happy to help.
This is important. Before you go, you need to know that 2024 is going to be unbelievably competitive in the world of pilot hiring, and you need to make sure that you separate yourself from the herd. The only way that you can guarantee that you'll land your dream job is by partnering with Spitfire Elite Interview Consulting. We are the only choice for application review and interview prep. We are the partners that you've been looking for from start to finish, and it's never too early to be part of our community. Just go over to my website, spitfireelite.com, and use the coupon code R4P to save yourself 10% on all of our services. Again, that's the letter R, the number 4, and the letter P to save 10%. So go out there and slay your interviews.